Laurence, where do we stand with Colton Herta actually having this come to fruition in 2023?
Let's start with the good news for Colton Herta and having a US driver on the grid, and that's that the teams want it to happen. So AlphaTauri would be his landing point. Most fans will know that that's the junior team of Red Bull, so quite a big deal. Good place to go in. Lots of drivers, including Max Verstappen, started their careers at that small team and progressed. Colton Herta's quite young. He's got a lot of potential. He's shown that at times in IndyCar, but the one thing he doesn't have is enough points to get a super license. Now, believe it or not, these racing drivers, they do need a super license to compete in F1. And the way that it's set out is that you get points for finishing in positions in other championships, and you accumulate those points over time. And what you need is 40 points in total over a 3-year period to be able to qualify for a super license. Colton Herta doesn't have that. He has 32. And that's a problem because there's not enough time left in the IndyCar season for him to move up the standings and get more points. So the question is will the FIA bend their own rules around super licenses to allow him in? And it's a really interesting one. Most of the noises, both from the FIA and F1 and some rival teams, the likes of Mercedes and Haas, has been, look, you can't do it. It's not fair. There's lots of drivers who would love to get a chance in F1, but this super license system is there for a reason. It's there to make sure only the very best drivers end up in F1. So it's an interesting one, but there are some potential workarounds. There's a clause in there about COVID. So because we've had COVID over the last 3 years, if you can prove that the impact of the pandemic meant that you didn't get as many points as you potentially could have or should have, then potentially you're allowed in. So there'll be a lot of talking behind the scenes, but if that happens, we're pretty much ready to go. Herta would go into AlphaTauri. Of course, Pierre Gasly and Yuki Tsunoda are there at the moment. Gasly would go over to Alpine to replace Fernando Alonso, who we already know is going to Aston Martin. And then we'll have to talk about Daniel Ricciardo later and what happens to him. But that's where it stands. But it's really on a knife edge. And I honestly don't know which way it's going to go just because it's with the FIA and they said they don't really want to bend the rules.
Nate, do you view this as it's just worth a shot? Let's see if we can kind of push it through and force Colton in here, or should you wait and actually allow him to get to the 40 points and then try to get him on the grid?
Yeah, I think I'd love to see Colton Herta race in Formula One. I think a lot of people would, but I think it's a really bad precedent to set by forcing this in. And I think that, Gunther Steiner said that, as much on Thursday before Zandvoort, he was like, you can't, the rules exist for a reason. We all agree to them. We abide by them. We don't try and bring drivers in that don't have a super license. So I think it would open really shaky ground for them up. I think that at the root of all of this, really, even if you ignore all the super license stuff, is that IndyCar definitely deserves to have a better weighting than what it has now. So it's not actually rated that well in the FIA super license points. And I think that you can kind of understand why from an FIA point of view. If you put your FIA hat on, they want to safeguard their pyramid into Formula One. They've put a lot of money into that. They're making the cars similar and trying to prepare drivers as best they can for that system. But I think a lot of people in IndyCar feel very slighted by that. And I think at the moment, there's only 3 drivers who, under the current system, actually have super license points, which is kind of crazy because I think a lot of people think there's definitely more than 3 drivers in IndyCar who would be worthy of a shot at Formula One. There's a few stats going around. If IndyCar was even weighted the same as Formula 3 or Formula 2, we wouldn't be having this discussion. Colton Herta would easily have enough points to be racing in F1. So while I don't agree that the FIA should bend their own rules for this, I definitely think that the points available for IndyCar should be much bigger, because I think that we're going to get a lot of occasions like this going forward. And it's not just because of the American driver aspect to it. I think that is a big thing. I don't think necessarily Red Bull and AlphaTauri would be this interested in Colton Herta if he was Belgian or if he was someone else, because they've got drivers in their youth academy. So I think it is the American thing is part of the equation. But it's just so complicated, and it's a real shame because I think ultimately that's what's going to stop it, and then people will see it as another slight to IndyCar and stuff like that. So hopefully what they do from this is they look at it, they assess where they're at with those points, kind of change things up. And I think Herta, I don't know a huge amount about Herta. I know what people have said, and he's won 7 races in IndyCar, and if you think about, I know it's a very different series, but Charles Leclerc's got 5 victories to his name. You think about the way we look at him. IndyCar is obviously a lot different, but it's a series that has a much bigger depth of winners. It's a much more competitive field. Drivers can win a lot more drivers can win races. So I think if Herta was in a series like that and he'd won 0 races or 1 race, I'd think, well, maybe this guy's not that good. But the fact that he's got quite a handful of victories in a competitive series like that, I think it shows he's worthy of a shot. And the problem with this is it potentially dissuades IndyCar drivers from wanting to go to Formula One, because again, another aspect to this is that at a very young age, at the moment, American drivers are having to make the call: do I stay in America, in North American racing, which and then the end goal there is Formula One, or do I move over to Europe and try and go through the pyramid? And the issue there is it's very difficult for a lot of those guys to adapt. You imagine when you're a teenager moving, across to a different continent to race. Alex Rossi tried it. I mean, Colton Herta did briefly go over to Europe. So it's tricky, and I think that hopefully, whatever the outcome from this is, and I'm the same as Laurence, I think that we'll probably end up with Herta having that blocked. But hopefully, what we get out of this is that the system has changed around.
Improve.
Yeah, and that in future this doesn't happen again, because I think Herta at least deserves a shot. I'd love to see him, how he could do, and it'd be great for the Red Bull Academy. I think it'd be great for Formula One because we get to see Gasly move to Alpine as well. So there's a lot of things that are great about this, and it would be a shame if we thought about them all and then none of them happened. So let's see what happens. Maybe things will change, but yeah, it's a real tricky one.
What's our timeline here in terms of when we would possibly find out if it's going to be blocked or not?
Well, Helmut Marko was saying just last weekend that if there's going to be an announcement, it's going to be by Monza. So it could be very quick. Okay. And in theory, I don't know. I guess it depends how much politicking goes on behind the scenes to try and prove that he deserves the super license or not. Or there's a way, that you can argue that he should have it because he should have that amount of points by now. But I think from a fan perspective as well, you really want to see it. You really want to see it happen, because Nate and I have had this conversation a number of times. Like, are the IndyCar drivers on a level with the F1 drivers? And we've recently seen a couple of F1 drivers go over to IndyCar: Romain Grosjean, Marcus Ericsson, obviously Alexander Rossi was in F1 for a bit. And, they've all done pretty well in IndyCar. And it's been really fascinating to see if a driver can go the other way. The last time we saw it was Sebastian Bourdais, I think, if my memory serves. And that was coming from, a very good position in the US, and then going into, Toro Rosso, which was what the junior Red Bull team was called back then. He didn't do so well, but he was at a much later stage in his career. And I think that's crucial. And I think that's why it'd be so good to get Herta in at this age. Early 20s, got a huge amount of potential, we think. Will he be, this great American driver that the US is really wanting to see in Formula One? Possibly not. I don't know if he's quite on that level, but the only way we'll ever find out is if he gets put in there. So that's what we're hoping for. Whether it happens or not, yeah, I think we'll just have to wait and see.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.